This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. It's like you're doing like a little beat with your mic. Right. Well, good morning, Kelly. I feel like it's been a little while.
It has been, I think.
Yeah.
We're just coming off, for us, we're just coming off our winter break, so.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly when this is going to be published, but a couple weeks. So yeah, it's been a wee bit. What do we got going today? What's happening? What do we want to start with?
Well, it's really cold outside.
It is.
I don't know about you, but so, I know Kelly knows this, but maybe not everyone else. But so we have a little hobby farm, and so we have a horse and a cow, and ducks. So I'm outside taking care of the animals, and the cow's water trough is like completely frozen, 2.5 inches thick of just ice. So I knock that all out, throw it out, and I put in some more water, and like I'm feeding the horse or whatever, giving him his grain, and by the time I get back, I could already tell the top layer of the water in the cow's trough is like already starting to like crystallize.
Well, how cold is it?
It's got to be close to 0 out there for it to do that. Yeah, so it's cold.
It's 17 here, so that's a wee bit.
It's probably single digits here. Yeah, so I'll continue with sort of kind of our usual cadence. Not so much news, but kind of a local instance, I guess. So, as you know, I try to be part of some groups on social media, and this post came up on my feed about a concerned mom, and that her son's bag was being checked regularly, and basically like, why is my son's backpack being checked? And then why she posted was, they actually took him out of class and to check his bag. Now I don't know if they like announced it in class or whatever, so I don't know to that detail, but anyways. So then I'm reading through all the comments, and then you see that someone had said, hey, you posted in another group in the same town that your son was suffering from like depression and had like some suicidal thoughts, and made some comment that basically insinuated that he would potentially harm himself. So then you're like, oh, okay, so now you're kind of getting like the full story. And the concerned mom was like, well, that was in October and it's now January, so it's okay now. He's okay. So right there, I'm like,
no. Yeah.
I mean, so I was trying to, I'm like, all right, I gotta think like Kelly when I make this comment.
Oh, that could be dangerous, right?
Yeah, think like Kelly, but like tone it down a little bit.
Yeah.
So I made some somewhat lengthy comment, but saying, hey, basically the school's doing what they should be doing. They should be checking his bag. Whether or not they should be pulling him out of a classroom in front of his peers to do it, I don't know. Maybe. So maybe you can add into that later. But the interesting thing was, someone had, I initially made the comment of like, hey, I don't really know everything, but like my initial reaction is they're obviously looking for something. Maybe they got a tip from whoever that maybe there's drugs or a weapon of some kind in there, so maybe that's why they're looking. And she writes, well, we don't own any weapons. So, and you hit some people that are Or like, how would they know that? How would they know that you don't own any? It's not like they don't have access to knowing that you do or don't.
They could, but I
And
mean, not readily, not
right,
readily
not
available. They'd
readily.
have to go
And
through law enforcement, but if they can
yeah.
establish a need, they can get access to
So
that knowledge anyway.
my comment basically was, and we've talked about this before, and I basically said, yet he doesn't have access yet. Just because you don't have any doesn't mean he doesn't get it from grandpa, or he doesn't get it from his friend's parents or something by whatever instance. It's like,
Or he burglarizes a house or a car
yeah.
or what have you, right?
And so then further down, it's like, okay, this kid is, I think he was like 10 years old. They're like, he's 10. You have these other people commenting, what is a 10-year-old good at? Like, really searching for a gun? This kid's 10 years old. So then instantly I'm like, I look up, I know exactly what article I'm gonna post in there, and I bring up the instance in 2023 in Virginia where the 6-year-old came in and shot their teacher.
Mhm.
I'm like, this can happen, and it did. So yeah, the school's doing everything they should.
Well, maybe, right?
Maybe,
Yeah. So
maybe more. Should they be doing more, or should they be doing less?
so it depends on the circumstances, right? But we understand that depression for most people is a lifelong battle,
Mm,
right? Um, Suicidal ideation, once you get to that point, becomes a struggle, lifelong struggle. When you have suicidal ideation, it's one of those things that it's very similar on when you're on the pathway to violence and you say that violence is a viable solution to your problem. You can get them off that pathway. You likely can never get them permanently off that, right?
mm,
And the reason I say that is because in the back of their mind, they honestly believe that either the suicidal ideation or the violence ideation is a viable solution. It's an option. It's not just, oh, wouldn't it be funny if I did this? It's not in passing. It becomes a viable option. And you can convince somebody temporarily to get off that and get them on a path to um, uh, better, feelings, as better self-esteem with themselves and stuff. You can teach them how to recognize the struggles and work through it. But at some point, whatever caused them to get back or to get onto that pathway to begin with, they will experience again sometime in their life. And it'll put them right back onto. And I know this isn't necessarily a clinical diagnosis because I'm not a clinician, but it's like a drug addict who's clean for 10 years and has a relapse, right? They're in recovery. They're always in recovery. Does that make sense? So once we have that and we're working through that, we're likely going to need to continue to work through that for as long as we know that person, right? Long after, I mean, obviously we have kids that go to a school and then come back to commit violence, right? We've talked about the fact that it's a very short bridge between suicidal ideation and homicidal ideation, right? Those two are very closely related to each other. And we have people who are actively online encouraging people who are suicidal to become homicidal. Why waste it? Go ahead, kill yourself. Why don't you get back at society? Why don't you get back at those people that did you harm? Why don't you get back at all of those people who caused you to be the way you are? It's not your fault, but let's get some of those idiots out of the way, right? That kind of mentality, that kind of destructive talk is pretty prevalent on the internet.
mm.
So it's not a one and done like anything. It happened. They identified it in October. Obviously, that's been going on for some time prior to that. Reed left a bang in there. It's been going on for a long time. And we had whatever the incident was. And now we're going to have to start addressing it. So we're going to have to continue to look at those things that we can do to prevent the suicide, prevent the transition from being suicidal to homicidal, prevent any things that might happen. We're going to need to keep looking after that. Here's probably the only thing that I think was probably the school was lacking, and that's the communication with the parents. Right?
Yes.
Let's talk to the parents. Let's have a plan. Let them understand what's going on. Let them understand. Let's talk about why we're doing this, how long we're going to do it for, what's the plan to sort of decrease those monitoring efforts and work through that. So, there's obviously there's a concern when you start pulling a kid out of class. If you're going in and say, okay, Jimmy, it's time to get your bag searched because you're depressed and suicidal. I mean, you can't do that. But if everyone knows and that's happening on a regular basis, you have to take steps to protect their privacy and stuff. That's what FERPA is all about.
Yeah.
And HIPAA in this case.
So do you think a student like this would be like on an IEP? Is that what you call it?
It not necessarily. They could have an IEP
or something similar.
It depends on how. So an IEP is a individualized education plan. So it's really about addressing, generally speaking, about their academic success, right? And the support that they need to get them back on the academic track for success, right?
Do you think if he were to be on like some type of plan of like checking on him or something, right?
Yeah. So
is there some like accountability for the school of like, I don't want to say, checking off boxes, but checking off a box like, yes, I communicated with the parent of this instance. I communicated with the parent of this.
Yeah.
Is there any accountability there normally or no?
Hell, yeah, it depends on how you define accountability, right? So IEPs are mandated under federal law under certain circumstances, right? And there's a way that you have to do them. There's an IEP, there's the 4, which is an identified disability, and you make accommodations for that, right? So it's all geared towards the academic success of the child. Get them to be successful. The problem is many the learning disabilities, the physical and emotional disabilities that now qualify is from a layperson's perspective, which I'm not an expert, but they're trying to use that same model to address all of these other emotional issues that people have, that they might be very successful in the academic environment, very intelligent, high functioning, autistic, even people who can be very successful in the general academic environment. But because they have this, they say, okay, we need to put them on an IEP. I'm not sure that the IEP is necessarily the correct mechanism. Now, when you ask where's the similar to the IEP for these types of situations, and currently I am not aware of any federally or even any state mandated requirements. That being said, if you are concerned about the safety of somebody, either that they're a harm to themselves and or to others, you should use that kind of model, the IEP model, not calling it an IEP because it doesn't necessarily meet the criteria for that, and call it an individualized safety plan. And so there's a couple of things that we have to consider, right, is use the guidelines within the IEP, privacy, protecting the student's ability to succeed, but do it from a safety perspective, an emotional perspective, a mental health perspective, and work through that, right? And have regular meetings, have a plan, adjust the plan, get the right people that you have access to, get them the right resources, work through that in a similar fashion. We don't, and just as an example, very few kids, and in fact, I don't even think it's a thing, but it could be that I'm just not that well versed in IEPs. But once you put somebody on an IEP, they're on it for the duration of their academic career, up to and including higher education, right? That IEPs follow, 504s follow students all the way through college. They get accommodations. They get, when they're taking standardized tests, SATs, they get accommodations for those. So if you have established an IEP and stuff, I don't know why we wouldn't do that in the safety environment, right? Because once you identify that there's a student of concern that you need to monitor, then you really should sit down and figure out what's the best solution here. How do we do this? So forth. Now, oftentimes what ends up happening is the actions that the student takes in the school setting could elevate themselves to allow for or even require disciplinary action, detention, suspension, expulsion, that kind of stuff. If you are going to do that based upon some actions that a student has made, you need to establish this individual safety plan and work through that. I'm not saying don't do discipline. Follow your disciplinary processes. But let's look at the root cause, not just that he's a 12-year-old acting out or whatever. Let's find out what's going on. And if they need a safety plan, let's put them on that safety plan. If you are suspending them because of some minor act of violence or some leakage that indicates that this is not a good place for this kid to be in, and you suspend them or you expel them, you should create a re-entry plan, because that student is going to return to school somewhere, right? So I'll give you an example. We had a pretty high level threat, expelled when I was a safety director. We expelled the child, and the principal said to me, that kid will never come back here. Because I said, what are you going to do when they come back? What do you mean? I said, you need to figure that out. And he goes, he'll never come back here. And I said, yeah, maybe not. But as all of our educators know, or should know, principals are not in control of who attends their schools. Somebody else in the district is.
Yep.
Returning the child to that environment may be the best solution, or it may not elevate it to the point where the principal thinks it is, but they're not in control of exactly who does or doesn't get to go to their school. So create a plan. And this should be done for every kid that you suspend and or expel based upon these concerning behaviors. And what are you going to do with that child when they return to your school? If they don't, then you notify the school and say, hey, this happened. This was our plan should that student have returned to our school, but that student returned to your school. So here's what I would be looking out for with regards to this student. Have that conversation. That way we can never get back to, well, I didn't know. He just showed up at a school. We had this in Georgia at Appalachia High School, right? He was removed from one school, put into another school. Nobody knew about what was going on there, right? This is all about the communications. And the law enforcement said, we didn't have a crime. There wasn't anything we can do. Well, you can have a threat without having a crime.
Yeah.
What was the level of concern? Right? Maybe it just was one step below the threshold to make an arrest or to have established a crime. You can't just say, well, there's nothing else we can do. You got to go back to and say, this is a student at one of our districts. Maybe we should talk to the school and say, hey, this is our conversation that we had. This is some of the stuff that we had coming from, I forget where that came from, the FBI or some threat center or something. The kid was making threats. And then that file should move from one district to the next. I know that was a long answer for what we were attempting to do, but it gets back into almost every school shooting, act of violence that we see. We go back and we look at all these opportunities that we missed, and people start pointing the finger at each other. You didn't do this. Well, you didn't do that. You should have done this. Well, you should have done that. Well, number one issue with all of these events is communication. Yep. Communications. Get on the same sheet of music. Get on the same team. This is not, I'm law enforcement. I can't talk to the schools. I am the school. I can't talk to. I recently did a blog on student privacy versus safety, right?
That was a good one.
And that was spurred on by a former colleague of mine asked the question about, well, the schools won't share any information. Well, that's not necessarily true. Let's figure it out. There's circumstances in which they can share information. Almost every privacy law that is out there, there is an exemption for the greater good of public safety.
Yep.
Even client or doctor-patient privileges, attorney-client privileges, all of these things that have been ingrained in our society for the last 300 years or whatever. They have exceptions.
And that's probably because people are afraid of like getting sued or something for revealing too much information. So we're like, I'm just not going to do it at all. Like, I'm going to stay away from it.
But there's exemptions. The exemptions are different between different jurisdictions and so forth. But look at what your jurisdiction is, what you feel comfortable with. And there's been a lot of very creative solutions to this, including having court orders developed that allow for essentially an exemption for specific people on, like, let's say a threat assessment team. If you're doing a threat assessment, according to the court order, you have the ability to share as much information as you need to share. So it relieves them of that potential liability. Obviously, if they're being negligent in the release of certain information, they can't hide behind it because they're pretty well laid out. But it does allow for access to student files. It does allow access to prior law enforcement reports, both of which are oftentimes protected under privacy laws for juveniles. There's ways around it, and figure it out. Start talking to each other. Start working together.
All right. So then we'll move on to a little bit of a different topic here.
The topic of the day.
Very, very different topic, I guess.
Yeah, it's pretty different.
We're gonna talk about maybe something that not all of the educators might think about is school bus safety. So this is outside of your walls. So I guess when I think about school bus safety, and maybe this will be a trivia question later on in our podcast life, I don't really have a whole lot of experience on school buses.
Really?
Yeah,
homeschools don't have school buses.
Yeah, because I was homeschooled my entire life, so that might be the answer. Is why I ask really kind of stupid questions sometimes. But I did play in the soccer team, so we'd go on the bus to different schools and do the away games. And
So you had to go to school to leave school?
yeah, I wouldn't even like go into the school half the time. I'd I'd go there and I'd jump on the bus. But there were no seatbelts. Is that still a thing where there's
Yeah, I
no
think so.
seatbelts?
I don't know. Um, that's still a thing. They have the high backs to kind of help prevent that from happening,
Prevent what from happening?
from kids being launched through the bus. The problem
That's
is
crazy to me that there's no seatbelts.
yeah, the
That
problem
blows
is
my
though
mind.
is kids. It's I understand, and I understand both sides of it. Is you would have to have like 3 employees on a bus because you'd have to, one, make sure that they were buckled in correctly, and two, they kept them buckled. So you'd have to be constantly going up and down the aisle. Don't put your seatbelt back on. I mean, it. If you've ever been on a road trip and you had parents and kids in the back, seatbelts, and they know how to
Yeah, I mean,
put that, and you're trying to get these kids to school, and in rural, especially rural areas, those kids can be on a bus for up to an hour, right? But that's not really the. Is that really the safety that we're talking about?
no, I just wanted to throw that question in there.
Oh, okay. You just wanted to ease into it with why don't you have seatbelts?
Yeah, I just feel like it's a common question that people have, but
Yeah, yeah. That's what they back in the day when I was on a bus. They those backs were very low. The seat backs were very low, and it was as low, if not lower, than a regular like a seat in a car. It was a bench. There was oftentimes the bottom cushion wasn't secured, and then they did some tests to try to find a compromise of seatbelts versus because seatbelts were becoming mandatory in cars, and they had to
it's crazy to live at a time where like,
do. I wasn't made to
uh,
wear a seatbelt, and I probably didn't wear a seatbelt till after I was an adult.
that's so funny. But
Yeah,
even when I was younger, I remember we had a station wagon. It was the Buick station wagon that had like the faux wood grain on the side, and the back seat was like a flipped bucket seat, so you were facing
the back.
the rear.
Yeah. So
So like if you got rear-ended, like
yeah, I mean I was just coming into law enforcement when they were just making seatbelts mandatory in the early 80s. So
and you're talking about like mandatory like installed in a vehicle.
no, you had to wear them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they had to be installed probably in the early to mid 70s. Not 100% sure on that,
Okay.
but I can't remember a
Yeah, that makes
car
sense.
that we had that didn't have seatbelts. I do remember many of the cars that we had when I was growing up, you couldn't find the seatbelt because they got stuck back because nobody ever used them, and they just pushed them back
Yeah,
into the
I remember that.
that crevice.
I remember that.
They're a thing.
Uh,
But they moved the backrest up to help prevent the forward motion of a child. But that's not what we're really talking about
yeah, so
today.
you probably
Although
want to
we
talk
just
more
spent
about like the bus being able to
what's
communicate during an emergency that's happening outside of the school. Let's say as simple as the bus gets into a car accident.
yeah. So
How does the
let's
bus communicate that?
let's talk about the role the bus and the bus driver have in school safety, right?
They play
So what's that?
a pretty important part, I think. You talk about the role of a school is to get the kids there safely and then ensure that they're safe while they're at school and then make sure they're safe getting back home. So the buses are on the two ends of that.
Right. So they book in that. But here's the issue. It's not just getting them safe. That's what we want, right? Objectively, our objectives, we talk about this quite a bit, the parents and the community's objectives, and they should be aligned with our schools, is our kids can get to school safely while at school, they're in a safe, supportive, academically challenging environment. And then at the end of the day, they're returned to the parents safely and hopefully better for their experience, right? Pretty simple. But we talk about the physical safety a lot. So, yes, do they have accidents? Yes. Do they have fires on the buses? Yes. But let's look at what really this is. A school bus is the first point of contact for many, if not most of our students, at least in a suburban and rural area. Maybe not so much in the urban areas, but school buses, the bus driver is the first school employee to put eyes onto a student in the morning and the last person to see that student leave for the day when they drop them off at the bus stop. What information can we glean from that interaction? Like I said, in some of these rural areas and maybe even some of the suburban areas, these bus routes can take up to an hour or more from the time the first student hops onto that bus to that time that they're dropped off, either at home or at the school. So you have this essentially collection of students who are being driven around your community and being observed for an hour or so twice a day. So where are our opportunities here? What are we able to glean from that experience? How do we set a positive environment on that bus, a positive culture on that bus? Every bus is going to have a different culture. Why? Because the bus driver is going to be different. They're going to run their buses different, just like every classroom. So when I first started talking about this a little bit ago, to explain a bus and understand the role that it has in school safety, think of it this way. It is a rolling classroom. Sure, we're not standing at a board up. I'm sorry?
Rolling, compact, very close quarter classroom.
Right. Sometimes it's bigger than your classroom. Many times, depending on your situation, you're going to have a mixture of kids from all different grades. Right? True. You're going to have, and I experienced this personally when I took the bus from my community, which was probably about a 30-minute drive to my school. But my bus picked up middle school and high school students. Dropped all of the high schoolers or the middle schoolers off first, and then proceeded to the high school that was down the road, probably another 5-10 miles. So when you're mixing that kind of population together, what are you getting?
You're getting, I'm going to try to say this correctly, some potential for, some students feeling that they're, figuratively and literally above the others.
So you're going to get a culture of hierarchy.
Yeah.
So
probably
you're going to
all the smaller kids are going to be designated, forcefully pushed to some certain area of the bus, whichever area of the bus is least desired.
Right? The older you are, the more desirable your location is going to be. Subdivided by the more popular you are in those areas, you're going to get the best of the best, right? But the other issue is you're going to have conflicts between the popular younger kids and the popular older kids. So there's going to be that conflict, right? You're going to have just the mere fact that I am older, I have more power than you. So opportunity for being bullied on a bus is huge, right? Environment and the culture that is created, oftentimes, and this is not meant with any disrespect to anybody, bus drivers have a tough job, but they're typically not the most educated, right? They don't have a degree in childhood development. They don't have early child psychology degrees. They don't have, they're there, put them in the back, take them on, right?
Yeah, because I think like I could go and sign up to be a bus driver if I wanted to, and I have no
No desire.
experience at all.
Yeah, but you don't need experience because they'll give that to you, right?
Yeah.
Because the only thing that you need to do is be qualified to drive that size of vehicle.
Yeah.
So you need a Class A, Class B type license
CDL
to
or
drive
something.
that.
Yeah.
And so you need probably health certificates and that stuff, but there's no degree required for that. Nothing. So now you understand the bus drivers' situations and qualifications. But now let's look at who is our first point of contact, who is our last point of contact. When we start talking about left of bang, and I know you're surprised that I brought that up today, but when we start talking about left of bang and our opportunities to shift to the left and start identifying people who are having issues, we have to set a baseline. We have to understand the norm. What is the norm? Most of us, if we have regular contact with children, we can figure that out, right? We have that little Sarah is having some issues today. What's going on, Sarah? Right? I don't think we train our bus drivers to do that. Hey, look at them, talk with them, say good morning with a smile on your face. How are you doing today? How was your weekend? You got a test coming up. How's that going? Just these simple questions. If you understand and you create a relationship, a positive relationship with your students that are getting on the bus, you have a much better opportunity to say, hey, Sarah, what's going on? Stevie, what's going on? And you can identify that. Am I telling you to call out the threat assessment team? Nope. I'm asking you, as a bus driver, you should understand what's going on with the kids on your bus. And let's, as a school district, teach them how to identify what are concerning behaviors, how to report those, who to report them to. How do we report something that I need immediate attention to? I need help right now. The likely default to an action is return to school. If you have an issue on your bus, say you have a fight or you have kids that are out of control, take them home. I should say, take them back to school. Have their parents come pick them up there, right? That's not always the best case, right? So if you have something happening at your school at the morning drop-off and you have buses that are incoming, how do you notify them to stay away from the school? And if you're going to tell them don't come to school, where are they going to go? Right? If you're having a significant incident, one of the best ways to mitigate an incident is not to add fuel to the fire, so to speak. Don't bring other problems in or other people into the scenario that you have to worry about. If they're already outside, leave them outside because then you don't have to worry about it, right?
So in that instance, would you basically skip to that step of like a reunification process and just like what if your reunification plan is that you get students on a bus and they travel somewhere? Would you skip all the before steps of reunification and then if they're already on the bus, hey, this is where we normally would reunify, so let's just send you there?
Well, so no, because you still need to set up your reunification. You need to identify that that's available.
Right. Yeah, you can't.
Right.
You can't just show up to your reunification.
Yeah, you can't.
We're here.
Yeah. Hey, what's going on? I don't know. They told her we're going to start reunifying. well, we can't do that today, right? So you should have a rally point, an identified state, let's call it a staging area where you can send them to, let's say a parking lot, a large parking lot where they can just sit, they can be safe. You can communicate with them as to what's happening. You can address your needs as a bus driver, so forth. And then we can we can worry about that problem later, right? Just hang loose. We have an issue that is more important that we're dealing with right now. Let's put you guys out here. We'll get back to you.
Man. And then the bus driver's got to deal with all the kids on the bus, try to keep them
Uh,
calm and not get too rowdy. Man.
Yeah, but I mean, that's part of their job, right? So, but if they have a culture where they can do that, they have control of the bus. They're not letting kids run up and down, which I've seen since I've moved here to Virginia. I've seen kids running to the back, waving at the cars behind them, and you're just like, dude, really? But if you have a good culture, they understand that, and you can control that during an emergency situation, even if the emergency is not there at the bus, then that becomes much, much easier. So here's the bottom line about buses, and bus drivers are not just vehicles to get kids from one place to another. They should be fully integrated into your safety plans. You should be doing drills with them. You should provide them with the training to help you, help your students, and help the safety of your schools. You should be doing drills, like I said, because there are certain drills. Let's say you had an issue on the bus. Do you lock down the bus? Can you lock down a bus? Can you secure a bus? Can you do any of those standard response protocols on a bus? The answer to that is yes, you can, if you understand how to do it, right? So again, mobile, temporary classroom. Think of that, right? Get them away from the windows, get them away from the door, right? Set them down below, protect themselves, right? Those types of things. Is it different? Yes. But can you do it? Yes. If you get into a situation, it's not unheard of. In fact, it's more common, as we know, to have acts of violence outside of the school than inside of the school, right? Where are your buses?
80% or something, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it depends on how you define
60,
it, but
80.
yeah, between 60 and 80 some odd percent.
Majority, sure.
The majority of them, yeah. So where are your buses at? Outside your schools. Do your school bus drivers know how to remove themselves from that situation? I don't know. Let's talk about moving the buses. Let's talk about locking the bus down so somebody can't get onto the bus. Should they be walking around looking for victims, right? So it should be part of your plan. Not to mention, what are the roles for the reunification and the safety of those kids, moving them from an impacted site to the reunification site? How is that being accomplished, right? So again, it surprises me that we're having this conversation, but there are so many people who just do not consider buses as part of. We tend to look at, we've talked about this, we tend to look at the security of our school and the safety of our school as to what occurs on school campus. Inside the building, our schools are much more than what happens inside those buildings. Let's talk about the Ethan scenario, bus safety, taking kids from one school to another for a sporting event, field trips, academic visits, all of these different activities that we use the buses for. And who's responsible? Let me ask you this. If you are on the soccer team from your high school and you go to an away game and something happens, who's responsible for the safety of your school?
You mean like if something happens on the bus or at that other...
At the other school. You are visiting another school as part of a sporting event. Who's responsible for that? The safety of those kids from that away school? Who do you think?
What do I think?
Yep.
I don't know. I think of it from a different perspective of like if I had a friend come over and they're on my property, they're at my house, like I'm kind of responsible for what happens. I think even from like a legal standpoint to some degree. So I would think of it that way, that if you had an away team come in and someone gets hurt, like it's kind of like up to your school to provide whatever needs to be provided to help in that situation. Although, when I was playing soccer, we did have our own, like, what do you call them? I know what they call them anymore. The trainers that would come with us. And so, like, if one of us got hurt, our trainer would come on the field and help us. But if that's kind of a pretty minor thing in comparison. So, like, if there was some other thing that affected more than one person, that was like the whole field, yeah, I think it's the homeschool version.
Right. So there, what I'm going to say is you're right.
That's what I want to hear.
Yep, you're right. It's the responsibility of the homeschool to take care of if you had a lockdown or a fire or anything like that. It's the responsibility of the homeschool to take care of the visiting school. They take precedence with their plan. Problem is, they don't ever communicate that with people. They don't ever say, okay, if this happens, they never walk into the visiting locker room and say, okay, if we have a situation, I am your point of contact. We use the standard response protocols. That's what these are. And your evacuation site is through this exit or through this door. They don't give you that plan.
No.
So the reality is you go back to Kelly's default and you are responsible. So
if no one tells you anything, you're responsible.
You're responsible.
Makes sense.
That means on a away game, you have your coaches and a bus driver, trainer, that athletic staff, right? And those people are responsible for that entire team and any of the booster clubs that are showing up, any of the band members that are showing up, any of that, right? All of those people collectively should be saying, if we have this incident, our rally point is the bus. If that's viable, right? Because we're going to load you up and we're going to get you out as quickly as we can. If we're in a lockdown, we're going to lock down until they release, and then we're going to reunify where? Are we going to reunify at the school site that we're at? Or are we going to create our own reunification somewhere else? Because a lot of the parents will have traveled to see the game. A lot of them aren't going to be able to. So make those determinations beforehand. That's when we start looking at bus safety. This is where you have to look at how are we integrating them into our safety plan, and how are we addressing these issues? How are we identifying these issues for us individually as district? Who's responsible for that? These are the questions that we should be asking ourselves all of the time. Now, I'm going to leave you with this. And the reason I wanted to bring this topic up was because there was a lot of discussion after the Appalachia school. Why didn't the bus driver recognize that the student in that event have a firearm in his back? There was a lot of discussion.
How would he? Like that? They're not trained to look at backpacks, are they?
They're not trained. And the assumption is that, and we know, but for the layperson, they're thinking, well, he had a rifle. How could he not see the kid had to take it apart and had to put it back together, right? So
yeah, I'm not.
But the fact is we missed an opportunity. We missed an opportunity to stop something from happening because the first school employee to see that child that day wasn't trained properly, right? So the next conversation, the next level of this is, okay, everyone understands the need to minimally train our bus drivers. What about the custodians? What about the lunch ladies, the cafeteria workers, the people that are monitoring lunch when you have 100 kids eating lunch, the yard duty people, the librarians? How are we looking at those employees and where do they fit into this, and how can they help us solve this problem? Again, I'm not saying you send them to college and get a degree in whatever. I'm saying, hey, these are concerning behaviors. You should be looking for these baselines. You should start understanding when they deviate from those baseline behaviors. And then you should report it to somebody and say, hey, little something's off today. I asked her and she just wouldn't respond. Maybe you have somebody check on her. Maybe something happened at home. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe she lost a puppy. I don't know. But let's start looking at those and saying, something's going on here. Not quite sure what it is, but it ain't normal for little Susie. Let's communicate. Because how do you know? Because I see her get on and off the bus every day of school. She's usually happy. Today she is not, right? That's all we're asking. How do they report that? How do they report if they say, that little kid, I think he has a gun in his backpack?
His backpack's a lot bigger than it normally is.
And it's kind of stretched.
Yeah.
At an angle, right? There's something in there that he's trying to hide. Or somebody said it got passed up through I'll call it the barking chain on the bus, right? Do you know what the barking chain is?
No.
Oh my gosh. 101 Dalmatians.
I haven't seen that in years.
Yeah. The barking chain is all the dogs start barking and they can it travels very quickly from one location to another with a message. Right? So every school bus has a barking chain. The guy behind says, hey, look, I got a gun. You got a gun? Hey, he's got a gun back here. Boom, 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 boom. Makes it up. And how does, once it makes it up to the driver, how does that person report that? What are his or her actions should they find that? Do you want them to go back to the school? Probably not. Just saying. But where do you take them? What do you do with them? Right? How do you bring that to a peaceful resolution? Right? I don't have the answer to it, but those are the things.
It's going to be different for every school, probably.
Every driver. Right? So, but set the framework, set the expectations, create policies that say, if you learn of this, you should do this. And I will say that bus drivers are mandatory reporters. So just like teachers, bus drivers are also mandatory reporters. So if they observe somebody they believe is being abused or neglected, or there's some sort of trauma or something, they have a requirement to report that.
There was an incident that was kind of addresses that. It was within the last year, right? There was a bus driver that I can't remember if it was a bus driver or the aide or whatever they want to call it on the bus. Whoever,
yeah.
One of them was actually doing the harm, and then the other person watched and didn't say anything, and they both got jail time.
Yep, the one for the abuse and the one for lack of intervening and not reporting.
Yep. So.
Yep.
Definitely a thing.
Yep. So. Yeah, in the public school system, every school employee is a mandated report, regardless of their level. All right.
Do you want to hear a funny story? Maybe I know the funny story. Here, I gotta pull it up. It's kind of
safety related, or is it just a funny story?
I mean, it's more just a funny story, but it's kind of school related, so it's funny. Right. So this is from one of my friends. He posted this on Facebook. He says, I got a call from the school to speak to our youngest son. So he's 5 years old, because he was having a hard time calming down after he did something that got him in trouble. Here's how the conversation went. Me, hey buddy, what's going on? His son, I called 911 and told them they needed to arrest my teacher. And my friend goes, why'd you do that? What happened? His son, she wasn't being nice to me. He goes, really? What was she doing that wasn't nice? She told me to put my snack away, but I wasn't done. So thanks, Brian, for that really funny story.
The kids are fun.
Can you imagine like being the the person on the other end of that call, like the amount of like crazy calls you get, and then you get a call from a 5-year-old saying my teacher's not being nice to me.
Yeah.
Probably would brighten up your day.
It would brighten up your day ish. Right? From a dispatcher's perspective, probably cute little story, but we have to deal with the problem now, right? Why does a 5-year-old have access to a telephone in school? This is not just a parenting issue, it's a school issue. And obviously we have some issues with understanding the use of 911. But yeah, it's a cute little story.
I feel like every kid has probably called 911.
Yeah.
I know.
Yes.
Time.
Well, not every kid. I'm batting 500. I had one that did. He was 9 or 10, old enough that my wife and I both worked. He was sick. He was old enough to stay home by himself, and we would take turns checking on him and seeing how things. And then, of course, in my position, I got a phone call saying, trying to think. I think I was a detective at the time.
Was he just trying to like get in contact with you?
Yep. He was. He dialed 911 and just wanted to see if what would happen. I think bored, and they got concerned because why are you calling? I don't know. Just wanted to. Where are your parents? At work. What are you doing? I'm home. You're home alone? So
I could see how that went.
So yeah. Being a sick kid bored. You got bored watching TV on the couch. It happens. We deal with it.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.